Okay, everybody, back with you again. So now we're going to really start getting going on our build here. So just a couple of things I just wanted to point out. I'm going to be using these little rare earth magnets here. They're about 1 millimeter thick. Oops, I just lost one. There we go. They're about 1 millimeter thick each, and the sort of the electronics bay door goes into this little slot here. So what I did was, just to make my life easier, was while I have this piece flat, is I just cut that down right there about another 2 millimeters, so then I don't have to worry about, you know, sort of trying to melt a hole down into the foam to recess the magnet or anything like that. So you know, just a little pro tip there. All right, so we're gonna get going on our bottom structure here. So first, a couple of things. I've got my hot glue gun warming up. I've made a couple of these. These are, I know they look kind of weird, but this side and this side are 90 degrees to each other. And the reason that I cut the corner off here is that, you know, we'll just dry fit this here for demonstration purposes. So I've glued this on now, and I want it to, you know, I want it to dry at 90 degrees. You know, a nice right angle. So especially with hot glue. You know, if you've run a bead, let's say you've run a bead of glue down here along the, you know, between the wing plate and where I've put this thing, I don't want to stick this in there, you know, to check that it's true. And if I've got a corner here, I end up gluing this to the plane, you know. So yeah, so I made, you know, this size, and I've also got a smaller one, you know, for sort of fitting into smaller spots. The other nice thing about making them out of scrap foam is that, let's say you're using a glue like epoxy or some other glue that takes a little bit longer to set up, and you want to make sure that the thing fully cures at 90 degrees. You can actually, you know, get your thing set so that it's perpendicular, and then just kind of poke a couple of pins in it, and then make sure that, you know, that the thing will dry perpendicular, and it will hold it just right. So a couple of those handy to have, other than, you know, the plastic. I just used a plastic one, I guess, from an old geometry set I've got around here somewhere, but that has a square corner, and I don't want to glue that to my plane. So anyway, so what we're going to do, first off, as always, we're going to dry fit. So when I dry fit my the side of my nacelle here, I notice that I've got a little bit of overhang, maybe a couple of millimeters. It probably wouldn't really be a problem in my hinge line there, but I'm not going to chance it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim. Get my knife here, and I'm just going to trim a couple of millimeters off the back of that, and then dry fit it again. Always easier to dry fit several times, you know, than it is to start gluing it on and then realize that you know, that you've got an issue there. Okay, so that looks pretty good, and before I get too far ahead of myself, I'll just double check the other one. So yeah, that needs a couple of millimeters taken off of it as well. Okay. So with foam, when you're putting it down into these slots, like this one was a little tight back here. So as I mentioned when we're cutting the plans out, you know, it's better to have these slots a little bit more snug. And then what you can actually do, this foam, you can actually just kind of go along and pinch it a little bit, just along the edge, and then that'll help you get it fit in there. And then you can, you know, you can kind of plunk it down in there. All right, so what we're going to do, first thing we're going to do is we're just going to glue these two side pieces on. I guess I don't really have a, yeah, I guess because they're mirror images. One's going to have a good side on the outside, and one's going to have a bad side on the outside, but it's on the bottom of the plane, so it doesn't really matter too much. All right, so everything's good. I'm happy with the dry fit there. So for this one, I'm going to run some glue, just a little bit of glue, hot glue along this side here to sort of make the butt joint. And then after I get that lined up and it's started to firm up, then I'm going to run my glue gun along and, you know, make the seam, because this is the bottom of the plane, and, you know, it's going to be taking some stress. So we want to put some little extra reinforcement. The other thing I should mention is, you know, I put a lot of my chunks of spare foam into this box, and then I just cut them into pieces so that as I'm gluing, you know, if I've made a bit of a boo-boo and I've globbed too much glue in one spot, I can, right away just take a piece of scrap foam and squeegee some of the excess away. If you're not familiar with using a hot glue gun, you never used one before, again, I would suggest before you get working on your plane too much is maybe just take a couple of pieces of scrap foam and just sort of practice, running what sort of trigger pressure and all that sort of stuff you need to run a nice big bead. You don't want to be like I used to be, a card-carrying member of Overbuilders Anonymous, and then just keep globbing it on. Each one of these sticks weighs about 4 grams. It doesn't sound like much, but if you've used 10 glue sticks to build this plane, then you may have gone a little bit overboard. So just real quick about glue guns as well. I prefer to use a low temp glue gun. This is actually pretty cheap. I also have a high temp glue gun as well. If you have a high temp glue gun, that's just fine. Obviously it's going to take a little bit longer for your glue to cure and harden. The other thing you have to be really careful of with these foams is you don't let the tip of your high temp glue gun linger too long on one spot of the foam, or you'll actually end up melting the foam. I mean, even this, if I hold it in a spot long enough, I can melt a hole in the foam pretty easily. Okay, so let's get set up here. So I've got my little 90-degree thing here. I've got my glue gun. Just make sure that the glue's coming out okay, nice and hot. All right, so I'm just going to run just a thin bead. Now I'm not going to go all the way. I'm going to leave about an inch either side of this gap where the prop's going to run, just because I know it overhangs. Okay, so get it down real quick. Get my little angle in there. And you can just kind of hold it and make sure that it's good to go. Okay, so because I didn't put a lot of just a thin bead of glue on that edge when I made this butt joint, now it's actually hardened up pretty quickly. So okay, so we'll just do the same thing on the other side. So here it might be difficult for you to see, but this is what I meant. This is why I stopped putting glue sort of about an inch from either side here, because I didn't necessarily need, you don't need glue on this part of this side piece. And we're going to go back after anyway and run some more glue on either side there, just to make sure we've got a good solid joint. Okay, so we'll just do the same thing on the other side. Oops. See, I was paying attention, went a little too close to that gap. It's alright. So real quick, I'm just going to wipe that off there. There we go. Okay, get that down there before the glue hardens up too much. There we go. So again, just set my angle in there. Make sure that it's nice and perpendicular. Just press it down, make sure you've got good contact. Okay. So you want to keep an eye, I keep an eye on my glue gun here as my glue stick is getting in there. And then just grab yourself, make sure you got a couple of extra glue sticks, and we should be good to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go along, all the way along here on the outside and on the inside, just to make sure that I've got a good, nice strong bond. Again, all we want to do is lay down just a very nice bead, just so we've sort of got a bead that makes contact with with this part of the nacelle and the wing plate. Again, you don't want to glob in a great big, huge, thick glob, but this is going to give us some extra strength here. So again, like I said, if you haven't used a glue gun before, it's good to sort of practice, so you get sort of the all the glue guns, especially if you buy a cheaper one, say from the dollar store, the glue is going to come out at slightly different rates. Okay, so there we go. How's my glue stick going? Okay, so I'll just do, again, the same thing on the other side. Just a nice even bead. There we go. So we'll see here. I'm getting a little short on my other glue stick here, so we'll just pop another one in there, make sure. And again, we'll just finish that off all the way to the back. Again, and you can run, you can sort of run your the tip of your glue gun sort of back and forth over the glue that you've laid down, while it's still a bit warm, and then the heat of the glue gun, even if it's started to harden up, it'll soften it a little bit, so you can make sure that you've spread it nice and even. Okay, so we'll do that. This is a nice thing about building with hot glue. It is quick, and if you're careful and don't lay down huge globbing amounts of glue, it really doesn't add a ton of weight to your plane. So I'll be interested to see by the time we're done here how many glue sticks I end up using. Okay, so there we go. So that's feeling nice and solid right now. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to set this aside, and we're going to let those two side pieces set up. The next thing I like to do before I get all excited, and sometimes I'm my own worst enemy. I get excited. Get my planes coming together, and I want to get stuff done. It's important to do things. Get stuff checked first before we stick it in. So these are brand new servos. I've already taken the labels off. Just because we don't need to really carry those around. So what I've done, I've got everything hooked up now. This is my receiver. Obviously, however your receiver is gonna work out. Don't pay too close attention to where everything's plugged into my ports. This is just the way things work for my setup. I've got the motor plugged in. You'll notice I don't have a prop on it right now. I just want to check to make sure that the motor is actually spinning okay, that it hasn't been sitting, or it was a bad motor and I forgot that it was a bad motor. I'm going to use a 40 amp speed controller. It's a lot more than what I'm going to need for this motor on 3S, but the nice thing is that the way we're going to put this in, it's going to be, it's not going to be absolutely permanent, but it's going to be nice and stable and stationary in there. So if I decide to upgrade my motor, I don't have to worry, because I've already got a speed controller that can probably handle it. So what I've already done, I've got everything set up in my transmitter. I've already made sure, I'm just going to turn it on here. I've already made sure that in my transmitter, I know in a lot of modern transmitters, one of the easiest things for me to do now is that, because so many of my planes are set up the same way, is I'll just copy one plane, put it into another spot, and then just go back and adjust it. So what you want to make sure you do, if that's something that you do, and regardless, it's a good habit to get into, is make sure that when you've got your you name your model and you start mixing your elevons, or however you need to do that, is make sure that all your trims are zeroed out in your transmitter. I also like to zero out all my sub trims. Just make sure that there's nothing that's going to be kind of hiding in there that could catch you, or end up you install your servos, have a problem with your servos once they're installed. So I just get rid of all the trim and all the sub trim before I hook anything up. So I've already bound my receiver, so go ahead and bind your receiver, whatever protocol your transmitter and receiver calls for. Just a little, I guess, a pro tip. This little receiver is compatible with my transmitter and has this sort of long antenna on it. The only time I've ever had an issue with these was, I guess, because this got yanked or pulled or whatever, was it came apart and I actually crashed a plane as a result of it. So now what I do is I just put a little dab of hot glue on there, and it just kind of takes some of the tension off of the antenna wire. So if you have receivers that are like that, that might be something you might want to try. Just in case you end up with issues that way. Okay, so I've got everything powered up. I've got or I don't have it powered up. Actually, I need to plug in a battery, but I've got everything all hooked up, and so I'm just going to plug it in. Now these are brand new servos, and I've already made sure they were centered before I put the arm on. if you haven't, if they're brand new servos or old servos, what I always do is I plug them in first, or I don't have a servo tester, but I just plug them in first, let the servo center itself, so that in case the spindle, what you want to avoid doing is putting your control arm or your servo arm on and the spindle isn't centered, so that when you go to power it up, now your servo arm is off at an angle. So let it power up first, again making sure all your trims and everything are out, and then I just put my servo arm on. Now what I'm going to do here, these are brand new servo arms, so I'm just going to start off with my push rod is going to go in sort of dead center. So I've already drilled, might be hard for you to see, but I've already drilled a slightly bigger hole right dead center on the servo arm there, to make sure that I can fit my push rod in. Okay, so I'm going to set my servos up. Now you got to remember the things are going to be sort of sitting upside down in the plane, and this is going to be the back of my plane. I'm going to run the front of my plane. Sorry, I'm going to run my wires forward and then route them back, just to keep them everything as clear as possible away from the prop slot. So I'm just checking to make sure. So again, because these are sitting upside down, if I pull down on the stick, they're going to push the elevators up, and then I've got my elevons in the roll. Okay, so those are working well. They're moving nice and freely. Okay, and then you can just do, again, I'll just do a quick check. I set up a safety switch on my transmitter, so if I move the stick for the throttle now, it's not going to do anything. Shut that off. Okay, the motor's spinning. Now at this point in time, it doesn't matter whether the motor's spinning in the right direction. We're going to figure that out later. You can, if you want to, you can set your throttle points. I've shown how to do this in another video, but I'll just demonstrate it again. So you unplug everything, and again, this is safest to do with the prop off. So I've got my safety switch off, so everything's live right now. I've got my throttle at full, and I'm just going to kind of hold this up here so you can hear the hopefully hear the beeps. I've got enough dexterity to do this all. So what I'm going to be listening for is when I plug it in, it's going to, you'll hear a couple of beeps to let you know that it senses that it's got power to it, and then we're listening for 2 consecutive beeps, and when we hear the 2 consecutive beeps, we're going to chop the throttle down to 0. What that's doing is it's making sure that your speed controller knows where full throttle is and where 0 throttle is, just to make sure you're getting the max performance out of your motor. Oops. Okay, so switch is off. I'm at 100%. Plug it in. Okay, there was my 2 beeps. Okay, so then you get, after you chop the throttle to 0, I get the beep, beep, beep telling me that it recognizes it's connected to the 3-cell battery, and then that extra beep, now I know that I'm armed. So now the motor's going to work. Okay, so that's how I set throttle points, and that's how easily it works with the Turnigy Plush speed controller. So yeah, so okay. All right, so we're going to unplug all this stuff now because we don't want it all together. So I'm going to keep my servos, my receiver, and my speed controller handy, because now we're going to start installing our electronics before we put much of anything else on the bottom of the plane. So transmitter off. All right. Okay, so this is a fairly easy way, again, before we get going too far ahead of ourselves. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to install my my servos and my push rods. So I'm just going to feed I've already put the Z-bend or Z-bend in the end of my my push rod. So I'm just going to feed that in there, pull it around, okay. So, and then make sure that this clevis, now your clevis, depending on your push rod, might look a little bit different, but making sure that this clevis is essentially flat. Now the other trick with these clevis is you want to make sure, I know it's hard to see, but there's, you've got like a little bit of a tube here. You want to make sure when you start off that you've got enough thread so that this tube here is completely full. What you want to avoid in your rush is putting on a push rod where you've got like maybe 2 turns of thread inside this plastic tube, because then what happens is if you go to adjust it and now you've got to twist it off to make it longer, you'll run out of push rod. So it's better to have, I just always twist the push rod into this clevis until it's, you know, sort of right even there. The other thing with these clevis is sometimes, depending on how tight the this clevis is here, or how difficult it is to turn, is you might want to hold the push rod with a pair of pliers. The reason I say that is these are, you know, they're fairly easily bendable. So if you start reefing on this thing, I've already bent this one a little bit. It's got a couple little wows in it, but if you were to hold on to this and start reefing on this to turn it, if it's really tight, you're going to end up bending the push rod, which we don't want to do. Okay, so like I said before, this servo is going to go like this. So my wire, my servo wire, once it's inside the plane, is going to start running forward, and then I'm going to route it back. Okay, so I've got my, let me turn the plane here so it's easier for you to see. So I've got my Z-bend, my push rod in my servo end, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to clip the clevis into my control horn and just snap it there. Now we're not going to. I know sometimes people they'll put like a little zip tie around there to keep that from opening. You can do that later on, maybe, you know, once you're confident everything's set up the way you want it, but I wouldn't do that right now because we may have to take this off, you know, disconnect this clevis to get the fine tuning done on our servo. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to just make sure that I've sort of got my servo positioned so that my elevon is laying flat, and then I'm going to take a pen, and I'm just going to mark the outline of where the servo is going to go into the foam. Okay, so hopefully you can see there. So now I've got a rough outline of how my servo is going to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I like to use my little number 11 X-Acto knife, and it's always better to cut, you know, just cut on the, turn this so you can see it out of the way. It's always better, I find, to cut on the very inside of that line that you've drawn, because, you know, you're actually sort of tracing on the outside of the servo. Better to it be a little bit snug than a little bit loose. Okay? So I know we've already put some glue here, so it might be a little tricky. So we'll just gently push that in. So there we go. So we've taken that piece of foam. Now I actually don't throw these away right away until I'm completely done the build, because I found sometimes I've, you know, put a servo in the wrong spot, and then when I go back, now I've already cut a hole in my plane. So if I've already just saved this, after I pull the servo out, I can just kind of pop that back in. Alright, so what we're going to do is, I should have done this before. I use hot glue to install my servos, and I find it a lot easier to get the hot glue off if I just put a little bit of tape. It doesn't, you know, it can be masking tape, could be whatever kind of tape you want. So I'm just going to tape this, you know, sort of on the area where I'm going to glue. I'll just cut a little bit off here. It's easier to put it on and then trim it. Okay. So I won't make you sit through doing both of these. I'll do this one first as a demo, and then I'll put the other one on. I'll pause the camera and put the other one on. Okay. So put some tape on there. So I'm just going to trim it on the top here. So what this does is it allows, you know, one of the beauties of scratch building, you know, with foam and, you know, park jets or other foam planes is that, you know, you can so easily recycle components between planes, and it's just a lot easier. You know, you pull this out, and rather than, you know, trying to take you know, isopropyl alcohol or a knife and scrape off all the old glue, all you have to do is essentially, when you pull the servo out, just peel the tape off, and now you should have a nice clean servo. Okay, so always feed the wire through first. Get that in there and out of the way. So we're going to give this a little dry fit first, just to make sure. Okay, so that's a bit too snug. I don't want to push it in too hard and break the foam. So it seems a little snug on the top, so I'm just going to trim another couple of millimeters off the top there. There we go. Try that again. And don't worry that, you know, my elevon is lifting up here a little bit. We're gonna fine tune and then adjust all of that when we get to that point. Okay. So there we go. So there's a good dry fit. So now what I'm going to do is just going to pop that out. Just leave the, you know, just leave the wire in there, and get my hot glue gun. We're gluing a whole bunch of other things to it. And I just put, let's pretend that this is the other side. I just put, you know, sort of a good generous bead along the bottom, because when you push it into the plane, you know, it's going to spread along the bottom. So this is the part that's going to contact the wing plate. So I just put a nice generous bit on there, get it oriented, and then slide it in there. There we go. There. So at this point in time, if you want to, I normally just put a little, maybe a little bead on the outside. Just push that out of the way. I might just run a little bead of glue just along the top there. And for me, that's normally plenty. Again, we're trying to keep the weight down, so I'm not going to put a whole lot of glue on there. All right. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to just pause now. I'll get my other servo hooked up and ready to go, and then I'll come back with you, and we'll move on to installing the next bit of electronics, which is going to be our receiver and our speed controller. Okay, folks, so we're starting to see signs of life. I've got my two servos installed and just hooked up there, so everything seems to be working. Left turn, right turn, up, down, everything's working just fine. I've already done a little bit of adjusting with my these threaded push rods. One thing I find that works best for them is, you know, and this is a good time to get most of that done while, you know, the plane, you can lay the plane flat on its back, is I like to leave everything plugged in, because then it always keeps a little bit of resistance on the servo arm. If you do it with the thing unplugged, sometimes you might just bump the servo arm, you know, just a few degrees and not really realize that you've done it, and then you go to plug it back in and the control surface is still out of whack. Sometimes these clevis can be a little bit difficult to pop apart, so I just put like a pen or a screwdriver and, you know, just kind of gently twist it. There you go, and now it's come apart. So yeah, so again, just the tip there is I like to leave the servos powered up while I make those fine adjustments. And as you saw when I was moving my surfaces, there's a little bit more fine tuning that I'm going to do in my transmitter later. But anyway, we know that that's working, so that's great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unplug the battery here, and I'm going to unplug my servos and my. Now you can do, if you want, you know, that if you just so that these wires are not flailing around your servo wires, because you've already got the servo wires installed. So just so that they don't get in your way, you can actually just take a piece of tape. You know, and sort of just tape them down temporarily, sort of, you know, out of your way kind of thing. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, I'm going to actually zip tie my my speed controller and my receiver in, and main reason, it just kind of gets them up out of the way. I'm not worrying about them coming loose, you know, because everything is wide open on the bottom of this plane. You know, there's nothing really that, you know, if the Velcro happened to give loose or whatever, your speed controller or your receiver comes loose, it could end up flying back into the prop. And I've just found it's a lot easier to just kind of zip tie them in place. So out of my magic little bag here, I'm going to grab, got a couple of zip ties which should be long enough, and I'm also going to grab a popsicle stick. So I still got my glue gun plugged in here. So the way that I like to do this is the way my motor is going to be spinning, I'm just using a normal actually puller prop, but the prop is going to spin, so the prop is going to be mounted backwards, and the prop spins, so if I'm looking at the back of the plane, the prop is spinning clockwise, you know, looking from the back. Let's refer to everything looking from the back for now, make it easy. So the prop is going to spin this way, so what's going to happen is torque roll, which happens opposite to the direction of the prop, is going to be going that way. So that's why I like to put my speed controller, which is a little bit heavier, I like to put my speed controller on this side to help, you know, just give me a little bit more weight on the right side of my airplane to help counterbalance the torque roll. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of roughly place it. Okay, my wires, my motor wires are coming back here, so those are going to be plenty close to the motor. I'm not going to have too much problem. I'm out of my way of the servo there, and I'm going to be able to, you know, when I install my battery, I'm going to have my power connection right there, and then eventually I'm going to thread this. This is my, you know, my plug that goes into my receiver to power the plane. So I kind of roughly figured out where it's going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this on the outside so it's a little bit easier for you to see. We're going to do the same process with both the speed controller and the receiver. So now once I sort of have that where I want it, I'm going to take a pen and I'm just going to make a little mark sort of on the top of it and on the bottom of it. Okay, now obviously I would be doing that you know, on the inside of the plane normally, but just for demonstration purposes. So you can see I've got two lines here. So what I want to do now is measure those two lines. Where's my ruler? Only got 6 of them. Do you think I could find one when I want one? Okay, so that's about 1 inch and 1/8. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut myself a piece of popsicle stick that's actually just about 1 inch. Okay. So we'll just kind of give that a clip here with my trusty dollar store pliers. Alright, so there we go, we've got that about 1 inch long. A little piece to get taken off of there. So what we're going to do is, actually we'll do this part first, is just take your knife and just cut right where I've made those lines. I'm just going to cut you know, a little bit of a hole here. Okay, and then just double check. Just going to take my twist tie. Now, just to demonstrate for this one, I'll put everything on the outside. So I'm going to feed this through the top, like so, and then can't see where the hole is on the inside of the thing. Okay, there we go. Alright, so there we go. So now we've got our twist tie like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of hot glue, and I'm just going to put a dab of hot glue on this piece of popsicle stick, and I'm just going to place it between those two marks. And why we're doing this is I don't want to cinch the, you know, if you cinch the twist tie down or the zip tie down right into bare foam, you're going to bite right into the bare foam. This is kind of a technique I learned watching a multitude of flight test videos actually. Okay, so now we've got a loop that we can feed our speed controller through. So we just feed that through there on the loop, and then looking pretty good. The other thing, you know, the nice thing is because you've zip tied this, you can always go back and cut the zip tie or whatever. Now I should point out, I always like to put where the label is normally on these speed controllers. That's where the heat sink is. I normally have Velcro on this side. I would Velcro it into a plane. I'm not going to peel that off. But you want the heat sink towards the inside so that it's exposed to the airflow to keep your speed controller nice and cool. So hold that in place. Just feed that through. Okay. Get my zip tie engaged again. Hold it in place, and then we're just gonna tighten down our good old zip tie. So it's a little tiny for my big sausage fingers here, so I'm just gonna give a little bit of a help with there. Okay, so that's nice and snug, and then I'm just gonna get my proper snippers here. Snip off the excess. So anyway, there. I mean, I'm probably going to change this just to make it look cleaner and not have that bit on the outside. But hopefully that demonstrates what I need. So now my speed controller's not going to go anywhere anytime soon anyway. So, and with having the popsicle stick there, it obviously prevents the foam from getting chewed up, because if you reef down on it too hard, what could happen is the zip tie will just pull right through the foam. So that little bit of popsicle stick really helps out there. Okay, so I'm just going to pause again. I'm going to do essentially the same thing with my receiver on the other side, and get the zip tie sort of sorted out the way that I like it, and then we'll be back and get moving on. Alright folks, so we're still moving right along. So I have my receiver installed now, and I've plugged in my speed controller and my two servos. What I made sure of is this, I've already hinged this, the bottom plate here with just a piece of the same tape I use for the hinges. Now you don't need to bevel this because it's just going to lay flat. So what I made sure that I did was I just sort of dry fit where the door is going to go, and then flipped it up. And I made sure that you can see all my servos and my speed controller plug in back here. So now I've got room if, I don't know, let's say I had to rebind it, or I've had something go bad, or whatever. It's just a little bit easier to get at my ports there where I plug everything in, without having to cut the receiver out. What I also did, I like to do with these receivers that, because they have a fairly long antennas, I've already just put some tape on there just to hold that antenna down and keep that from flopping around. Now we're going to fix up these the rest of these wires later on. So the rest of this actually, the bottom structure here is actually going to go pretty quick. So again, as we always do, we just dry fit these two pieces. Looking good there. So again, we'll just run some hot glue on the bottom. Pop that in there. Now, again, using our smaller thing, making sure that it's right on perpendicular. Okay, that's good. Now, what we can do, this will be a little bit tricky, but again, we can get things out of the way here. You can run a small bead of hot glue just down along the side there where it meets. Now you might have to sort of bend the foam a little bit on this side, but that's okay. It's a nice thing about foam, you can bend it to your will as need be. Alright, so there's one. Again, get my battery lead there. I don't want to glue my battery lead down on my plane. And boom. On the other side. And we'll just check it real quick. Make sure that it's perpendicular. Yeah, that seems good. So again, we're just going to run. I'm just going to run the bead along the inside. And what this is going to do is it'll make this whole bottom structure nice and strong, because it's going to take the impact of the landings and stuff. The glue gun left a bunch of goop on the inside here that I don't want. Okay, so there's the two center parts of our of the inside of our nacelles. Now, like I said, it's I've already taped this. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but I just taped it all together. So now this is going to fit. Again, you may have to bend the foam a little bit. These two little pieces here are actually going to fit inside the inner and outer parts of the nacelle. So again, you can see I actually don't have this inner part here is not quite as straight as it could be. All right, so we're going to have to probably just hold that while the glue dries. But okay, so what we're going to do now is just let me. Okay, so again, you don't want to glue the door. So if you just kind of bend it a little bit, I'm just going to run some glue there and there, and then on these inside bits here. The glue stick's getting a little low. All right, and then just press that in there. Make sure that it's nicely level on the bottom. And again, because I probably bumped it or something. And then just pop it. And just kind of hold it there till it glues. Now, if you were using another glue, maybe epoxy or foam tack or something like that, you may have to tape it. And again, you don't have to use hot glue to build the plane if you don't want to. So, oops. Okay. All right. So before I get busy with the door, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to throw another glue stick in my gun here. Oop. Give myself some scrap foam, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along. Yeah, I can see my seam here. So actually, what I'm going to do is put a little bit more glue here. Live and learn. Hold that. A little bit oozed out. So oh, sorry, somebody at the door. Hi everyone. Sorry for that interruption there. You probably heard my guard dog Bentley there going nuts, but anyway, so back at it. We're just going to finish off a couple of things here on the bottom. So I've already glued on that piece that I showed you earlier, just here in the center. The main thing here is just to make sure that it's flush sort of with this opening. Maybe it's easier to see. So it's flush with this opening here, because that's going to be part of the surface that we're going to put glue on, epoxy on, when we glue on our motor mount. So I've got everything now essentially set up. I notice I do have a little bit of a gap here on the one side on my door. Maybe it's not exactly straight, but it's not anything I'm going to worry about. Again, we're not working for NASA here building the space shuttle. It's a foam part jet. But one thing I'm going to do here is, now that I've got these butt joints here, the glue is dried, is I'm just going to go over top of the seams here with a little bit of extra glue. So I'm going to just grab my a couple of scrap pieces of foam, and we're just going to kind of drive that glue down right into the seam and then smooth it off, and that's going to make a really strong bond, and it's also going to give a little bit of protection to the bottom of the plane. So I'm just going to run a bead of glue right down sort of the seam there, okay, and then right away scrap piece of foam, just really, smoothing it right out, scraping off the excess. And what that does is it creates good tension there in the glue, and makes for a nice strong bond, and also gives it a little bit of protection. So we'll just go on these other seams here as well. Okay. Oop. Glue a piece of scrap foam to my hand. All right, and one more here. Okay, and the last one here. Boom. Squeeze that off. All right, there we go. So we'll just let that harden up. So I'm just going to demonstrate one side how I like to put my magnets. Now if you don't have these are these little 1 millimeter thick by I think 3 millimeter rare earth magnets. I think when I first got into the hobby, pardon me, 5 or 6 years ago. Oh, pardon me. I bought like 400 of them or something off eBay, so I'll probably never use them all. You could also use, in this situation, you could use maybe little bits of Velcro. The other thing too is, if you don't want to do that, you could do like you see on a lot of the flight test planes, you could put some bamboo skewer into the foam here so that it sticks out a little ways, and then just hook a rubber band of it. All you basically do is, you just want to prevent this, especially if if you're really flying aggressively, is you just don't want this thing flipping open, and then you go to try and land, and it's hanging down and could end up causing your plane to cartwheel. You just want to keep that in place. So all I do is I just take one of the magnets, just put down a little dab of hot glue, pop the magnet onto that hot glue. Okay. Now I've already pre-cut a piece of tape. And then what I do is I just take a piece of tape and put that over top of there, like that. Oop. Wonder what that was. I was taping my speed controller wires there. I didn't need to. All right, and then it's real simple. The magnet's only going to kind of go one way. Pop the other magnet on there, and then all I do is I just put a dab of hot glue on that. Press the foam down on top of it. Give it a little bit to harden up, and then should be good. And then now there's my magnet, and then what I do is I'll just take another piece of tape just to kind of help hold that on there as well. Okay. So I'm just going to do, I'll do that to the other side. So essentially we're done essentially with the bottom. We're really getting there. We've got our vertical stabilizers left to put on, our vertical fuselage if you want. I still have to trim it up like I mentioned in a previous part of the video. Install our motor, hook everything up, make sure everything's still working and the prop's spinning in the right direction, and we're going to have a plane. So yeah, so anyway, like I said, I'm going to install that other magnet, and this is essentially the end of this phase, of that phase building, putting all that. We've installed most of our electronics, so the next portion of the build is essentially just going to install this and vertical stabilizers, which will be one of the last things we do, and then install the motor, which is going to also be one of the last things that we do. So there we go, folks. We're almost there. Again, I'm just going to stop the camera now, and I'll be back with you with the last phase. In the meantime, now I might also, what I like to do is, if I'm going to paint, I'm just going to I'm not going to do a fancy camo pattern like I do on a lot of my planes. I'm going to try and come up with some lines and some shapes that will make it hopefully easier to see in the air when I do some of my demo tapes. So what I will probably do is I'll actually probably paint my horizontal stabilizers. These are or vertical stabilizers. These are actually going to be one of the last things that we glue on, because if I need to flip the plane around, it's a lot easier to do with these off. So these will be the very last things that we put on. So I'll just do that last little bit of stuff that I have to finish up on the bottom, and with the next portion of the video we'll just get it all finished up, and then we'll be ready to make sure everything's set up and ready to go for our maiden flight. Okay, so we'll be back with you in a while.